At some point in almost every relationship, something changes. The tone shifts, the attention fades. The way someone looks at you is no longer the same. Nothing dramatic may have happened. There was no argument, no breakup, no clear turning point. And yet, you can feel it. The energy is different. The behavior is different. The person who once showed interest now seems distant, colder, or inconsistent. This change is one of the most confusing experiences in relationships because it creates uncertainty. The mind tries to make sense of subtle signals. You start comparing the past to the present. You wonder if you imagined the earlier closeness, or if something you did caused the shift. To understand why people treat you differently than before, you have to understand how human behavior changes when emotions, perceptions, and internal motivations change. Relationships don't usually change suddenly. They change psychologically first and behavior follows later. One of the most common reasons people start treating someone differently is a shift in emotional investment. In the early phase of a relationship, attention is often high. People are curious, motivated to impress, and emotionally engaged. Over time, that initial emotional intensity can change. This doesn't always mean loss of interest, but it does mean the dynamic is no longer driven by novelty. When emotional investment drops, behavior changes, responses become slower, effort becomes inconsistent, small gestures disappear. This shift is often subtle, but the person on the receiving end feels it immediately. The important point is that behavior reflects emotional priorities. When someone treats you differently, it usually means their internal priorities have changed, even if they haven't consciously admitted it to themselves yet. Another major factor is familiarity. Familiarity reduces emotional arousal. This is a normal psychological process. The brain does not sustain the same level of excitement over time unless new emotional input is introduced. When familiarity sets in, some people unconsciously reduce effort. They stop being as attentive, not because they don't care at all, but because the relationship no longer triggers the same emotional urgency. However, not everyone handles familiarity in a healthy way. Emotionally mature individuals replace novelty with consistency and deeper connection. Emotionally immature individuals replace novelty with detachment. When someone treats you worse than before, it's often not because familiarity happened, but because they didn't know how to transition from excitement to stability. A third reason is perception shift. People don't respond to reality, they respond to their perception of reality. If someone's internal image of you changes, their behavior changes with it. This perception shift can be caused by new information, misinterpretation, unmet expectations, or comparison with others. Even small disappointments can accumulate over time and subtly change how someone sees you. Once perception shifts, behavior follows. The person may not even consciously realize why they feel less warmth or patience. They just feel different, and their actions reflect that internal change. This is why communication gaps are so dangerous in relationships. When perceptions change silently, behavior changes silently too, and the other person is left confused. Another powerful factor is power dynamics. Early in relationships, power is often balanced because both people are uncertain. Over time, power can shift. The person who becomes more emotionally invested often loses leverage. The person who feels less invested often gains control over the pace and tone of interaction. When power shifts, treatment changes. The person with more emotional leverage may become less responsive, more selective, or more distant. This is not always intentional manipulation. Sometimes it is simply the result of feeling less dependent on the connection. But psychologically, the one who becomes less emotionally dependent often unconsciously behaves with less care. This is why sudden changes in treatment often occur after one person reveals stronger feelings, invests more effort, or becomes more available. The dynamic changes and behavior adjusts to that new imbalance. Emotional safety also plays a role. Some people initially present their best version of themselves. Over time, as they feel more secure, their behavior becomes more authentic. This can be positive if authenticity means deeper connection. But it can also reveal emotional unavailability, avoidance, or low emotional intelligence. In other words, the before version may have been effort-based behavior, while the after version is their baseline behavior. This doesn't mean the person intentionally deceived you. It means early interactions are often shaped by impression management. Once the need to impress fades, behavior becomes more aligned with their true emotional capacity. If someone treats you worse than before, it may simply be that you are now seeing them more clearly. Another overlooked reason people change their treatment is internal life changes. Stress, life transitions, emotional burnout, mental health struggles, or new priorities can shift how much emotional energy someone has available. When emotional resources drop, relationships often feel the impact first. This doesn't excuse cold or disrespectful behavior, but it explains why someone may become distant without malicious intent. Their emotional bandwidth has changed. However, healthy relationships involve communication about these changes. When someone withdraws without explanation, the impact on the other person can feel personal, even if the cause is internal. Comparison is another silent influence. When someone begins comparing you to other options, real or imagined, their behavior often changes. This is especially common in modern dating environments where alternatives are always visible. Comparison doesn't require cheating to affect behavior. The mere perception that there might be something better can reduce emotional presence. Once comparison enters the picture, effort often drops. Attention becomes inconsistent. The person may still stay in the relationship, but their treatment subtly changes because their emotional focus is divided. This shift is rarely verbalized, but it is often felt. From the perspective of the person being treated differently, the psychological impact can be significant. The first response is usually confusion. You sense something has changed, but you don't know why. This uncertainty triggers over-analysis. You start monitoring tone, timing, and micro-behaviors. You become hyper-aware of shifts that previously wouldn't have mattered. This hyper-awareness is not irrational. It's the brain trying to restore predictability. Over time, inconsistent treatment can lead to self-doubt. When behavior changes without explanation, the mind often internalizes the cause. You may assume you did something wrong, even in the absence of evidence. This pattern is emotionally exhausting and can erode self-esteem if it continues for long periods. So what does healthy response look like when someone starts treating you differently? The first step is accurate interpretation. Not every behavioral change is about you, but consistent changes over time usually reflect a real internal shift in the other person. The key is to observe patterns, not isolated moments. The second step is direct communication. Calm, non-accusatory questions clarify perception gaps. Asking, "I've noticed you seem more distant lately, is something going on?" is not confrontation, it's emotional responsibility. Healthy individuals can respond to this. Emotionally avoidant individuals often deflect or minimize. Their response to your attempt at clarity is often more informative than the change itself. The third step is boundary awareness. If someone consistently treats you with less respect, attention, or care than before, and cannot communicate openly about it, the issue is not just the change, it's the lack of emotional accountability. Accepting long-term emotional inconsistency trains your nervous system to normalize instability. This can affect future relationships by lowering your expectations of how you deserve to be treated. From the other side, people who treat someone differently are often unaware of the impact of their behavioral shifts. Many people are not conscious of how their internal emotional changes translate into external behavior. They feel different, so they act different, without considering how destabilizing that shift can feel to the other person. This is why emotional literacy matters. Understanding one's own emotional shifts and communicating them prevents confusion and resentment from building silently. Changes in treatment do not always mean the relationship is ending, but they do signal that something internal has shifted. Behavior is communication. When someone treats you differently, they are expressing a change in emotional state, priorities, perception, or capacity. Interpreting that change accurately and without immediately blaming yourself is key to psychological stability. Healthy relationships evolve through communication, not silent behavioral drift. And understanding why people treat you differently over time is not about controlling others. It's about protecting your emotional clarity and choosing connections where consistency is valued.